When it's not just another meeting, when it's the event that matters, you need a production partner who delivers. Byrne Production Services specializes in multi-day meetings, conferences, and large-scale events that demand flawless execution. From cutting-edge audio and video to stunning lighting and staging, we're built for your largest events. Take your production to the next level. Visit byrneproductionservices.com and request your proposal today.
When you do 75 trade shows a year, how are you going to be able to compare your ROI on all your trade shows? I mean, you cannot just focusing on leads, right? Qualify business conversation. That can happen at a breakfast, at a social event, at the booth, during an evening function. We could come back with 100 unqualified conversation worth, millions of dollars potential opportunities.
Welcome to another episode of Production Value Matters, the Business Events Podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Byrne. As usual, if you're listening to this episode and want to share it with one of your colleagues in the event industry, don't forget to share this episode. You can hit subscribe or leave a comment. It really helps us put this content in front of other event professionals across North America and globally. So today, I'm really excited to welcome Francois Fournier, Head of Global Events at DTN, a global data and technology company supporting complex industries like energy, weather, and agriculture. With over 20 years of experience leading event portfolios for organizations including Fitch Ratings, Digital Asset, and Assurant, Francois brings deep expertise in designing global event strategies that deliver measurable business outcomes. He's managed event programs across North America, EMEA, and the Asian Pacific market, overseeing everything from high-profile trade shows, incentive programs, and sales kickoffs. Known for his practical approach to event ROI, Francois has developed a methodology for integrating measurement into every phase of event planning. Today, we're going to explore what metrics truly matter and how event professionals can tie their efforts directly to business value. So, Francois, it's a pleasure to have you on with us today. How are you?
Good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. So let's just start with your journey, Francois. You built an incredible career in global event strategy, spanning more than 2 decades across financial services, SaaS, and tech. What originally drew you to the world of event marketing, and what keeps you passionate about this space throughout all of its evolution?
Yes. So as probably, as you can tell, I'm not from the US. Actually, I'm from France. I grew up in Paris, and I decided to study hospitality management. So hotel management, went to study in Switzerland for 4 years, and really enjoy the whole, hotel industry. Done a couple of internship, for hotels. In events, catering, and when I graduated, I felt I wanted to really explore, the industry. And in Europe, when you have a bachelor, back then, you receive basically a year and a half visa to work in the US, the G1 visa. It's an exchange student visa. So I wanted to go to the US, and I had the opportunity. My first job was, working for small event management company based out of Miami. I worked for them for 5 years, and this is where really I get to learn, the basic of events, logistic, program management, a little bit of marketing. And that company was doing events for large insurance, companies at that time. So I really get, a lot of the, first experience in events, working with hotel, negotiating with, catering companies. I travel a bit as well. So that was really my first opportunity and exposure to the events industry.
Excellent. And so you've worked for major organizations, as I said, like Fitch Ratings, Accord, and now DTN. So what was it about DTN's mission and event portfolio that excited you most about stepping into that current role?
So the first thing about DTN, it's a weather technology, weather intelligence organization. So it's all about weather prediction, working with different, industry, energy, agriculture. So I really love the purpose of the company. Obviously, weather is an extremely important field, nowadays. It influences so many decisions. So I love the organization. It was a global company. And they have a lot of product, and they serve a lot of industries, from sports to energy, agriculture, education, military. So because they have so many products, they have a lot of events, right? They go to a lot of trade shows, they produce their own events to really, promote and also engage with customers, prospect. So when I interview with them, I really like the mission of the organization. And the second thing that I really enjoy and I find very exciting when I joined GTN is that I really got to work on a lot of different projects. And I think when you look at my career, when I was at Accord, for example, it was only trade shows, right? I mean, they produced their own trade show and I was responsible for trade shows. When I work at Assurance, a large insurance organization, there was a lot of incentive planning so just, focusing on that industry. And when I was at Fitch, it was a lot of internal events, like customers events. So at DTN, I get to do all of that. We participate to about 75 trade shows per year. We produce our own conferences, for the weather hurricane industry. We have incentive programs. We have a global program called President's Club, that my team and I are running every year. And we also do, a lot of internal client events. So that's really what I enjoy the most, like be able to be exposed to, multiple number of programs. I think every day is different. And I get to engage with a lot of groups in my organization, engineer, product, marketing, sales, the leadership team. So, it's an exciting time right now.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you've been in the business for over 2 decades, and you've seen firsthand how, say, measurement has evolved. From your perspective, what's the single most persistent blind spot or frustration that event leaders still face when it comes to event ROI, and why do you think it remains so hard to solve?
So, I think the challenge is what metric are you going to use to measure your ROI? And it took me, a few years really to come up with, that answer. A lot of organizations, for example, they are looking at, leads, right? I mean, leads, engagements. Other organizations are looking at maybe a qualified conversation or purely revenue. At DTN, we look at business opportunities, right? What the opportunities generated from a trade show. So I think the challenge is, what metrics you're going to use. Maybe it's branding, which is a bit more complicated to quantify. I know right now the challenge that we are having is with an incentive program. Like, how do you measure, a return from an incentive program, which is, when you reward your top performers with a trip, for example. It's not easy, right? Because you don't have opportunities. There's no sales generated from that type of program. So this is really a challenge, for example, and I know we'll talk later about how to measure this type of events, but that's something, for example, that remains very difficult, right, for event producers and planners to come up with a solution for this type of program.
And so, do you see a particular challenge play out differently in different sectors, like SaaS or financial services?
So in SaaS, when we go to trade show, the selling cycle takes a while. I mean, you're not going to have your sales at the trade show, or it takes some time. So we have about a 6 months selling cycle. So that means that when you come back from a show, you're not going to have your immediate ROI. I mean, it's a living analysis. I'll start gathering data right after the show, and then it takes me 6 months really to provide a very detailed, ROI report. So, talking to sales, right? Using CRM is obviously the key. That's our dashboard to see what's going on in terms of leads, opportunities. So, yeah, I think that's really that's the key.
So you've led a global event portfolio with, as you said, hundreds of events per year. Was there a specific turning point in your career where you realized that measuring ROI wasn't just a nice to have; it was a business imperative? Can you tell that where you came to that sort of eureka moment?
So when I was with Accord, which is an insurance technology association, trade association, I had a boss that was really into education. And, she kind of, convinced me to do my CTSM certification, which is Certified Trade Show Marketer certification.
Mm-hmm.
I was not familiar with CTSM. That was back in 2017. So when I did that whole 1.5 years of education, training program exam, that took 1.5 years for me to get my CTSM certification. The trigger came when I took classes and we talk about event measurement a little bit, and we talk about reporting, and I find it fascinating to be able to really be responsible to provide reports that will make influence decision and really have an impact on our decision. And that was really what really triggered me, like the whole event measurements. I started to, take classes and, went to training, and then I did my other certification as well. I just find extremely interesting, the whole AOI, aspect of events, and sharing, different methodology with peers.
Many teams struggle with how to measure. In your opinion, what are the most meaningful KPIs for commercial events today? And how should they differ between brand awareness, demand generation, and customer retention goals? And specific, just to give that a little dimension. So how do you balance, and you touched on this a little bit before, but how are you balancing leading indicators like engagement at a trade show with lagging indicators like closed won revenue?
So the following KPIs, we're looking at when we, talk about commercial events. On that, at DTN, for us, it's, sales leads, dollar opportunities. That's really important. Like what has been reported in terms of opportunities, and also close won deals. So, Salesforce, as I mentioned, is my dashboard. And when we come back from trade shows, salespeople have to basically, tag and enter all the information. And that's how I can see within 6 months, what the opportunities generated from a trade show, what are the close won deals. Another very important KPI for us is a qualified business conversation. That can happen, at a breakfast, at a social event, at the booth, but also maybe, during an evening function. That's really important. We also look at payback revenue. That's really one of the main KPI I use. So it's basically taking into consideration your new revenue, retention revenue from existing clients, and then compare it with how much we spent on a trade show. And we even include travel, T&Es, right? It's all in. So when you do that formula of, total revenue divided by how much you spend, that's my payback ratio. So that's a really important metric because it tells you what's your return once you invest $1. And, when you do 75 trade shows a year, how are you going to be able to compare your ROI on all your trade shows? I mean, you cannot just focusing on leads, right? Or just opportunities. So payback is really important to us. And that's how basically I kind of, have, throughout the year, all my payback ratio, and that help us making decision regarding, should we go back next year? Should we maybe get a bigger exposure, or maybe should we maybe downsize? And I think you talk about, brand awareness, right? So, we look at promotional value. So when you have your CEO, doing a keynote at a large trade show, for example, not a keynote, but maybe like a breakout, session, or, being able to moderate a large session, we try to come up with a value of how much impression are we getting, right? When you have 2,000 people in a room, looking at your logos, your presentation, listening to your case study, for example, that's something we consider.
Planning a multi-day event or conference? Then you know how chaotic managing show content can get. Version issues, last-minute changes, and the post-show scramble to send out IMAG recordings. ShowSync is built to fix that. It's your central hub for managing presentations, media, and video recordings across your event, without the mess of cloud folders or lost file links. With ShowSync, your show content stays organized, your crew stays in sync, and your post-show video files are delivered faster and cheaper, so you can move on to the next big thing without chasing down drives. Learn more at showsync.ca, because your content should work as hard as you do.
Enjoying the show? Don't miss a single episode. Follow Production Value Matters wherever you get your podcasts. And for bonus content, tools, and event insights, head over to productionvaluematters.com and subscribe. Stay sharp, stay inspired. Production Value Matters.
Yeah, I love those two concepts of the, what did you call it? The qualified business conversations.
Yes, exactly.
Which I think is just a great I'd love to ask a little bit further about how you actually literally measure that, and then the payback ratio. I
Yes.
think that's an amazing metric to say. We like what, and it goes away from, as you just mentioned, like you're doing 75 trade shows. Can you do lead attribution for that specific one that you did in Denver? Or like that payback ratio sort of says, well, our whole portfolio, if I'm interpreting this correctly, this whole portfolio of events is like we spent $1 million over this stuff, but it brought in 10. So if our payback ratio is 10-1, then we're doing
Yes.
something right. I'm oversimplifying it, but that's
No,
what
and
you're
it
getting
is. It is. It's exactly. So, like our target, for example, is 10 times what we spend. That's kind of
at.
our ideal target, right? So, if you
Mhm.
can get, payback ratio of 10 out of 1, that's
Mhm.
for us, a success. But every industry is different. Maybe
Mhm.
in a different industries, you will be looking at a much higher return. It really depends. Another also important metric we also are looking at is when you send, for example, 5 salespeople at a 3-day trade show, and they happen to have 50 meetings, right, over 2 or 3 days.
Mhm.
For us, you're saving on travel, right? Because how much it will cost for those 5 people to individually travel and meet with customers, prospects. So that's also the ratio we look at. It's by sending 5 salespeople with an average T&E of 1,000, for example,
Mhm.
you're saving money because they don't have to individually travel to those accounts. So we also look into that formula as well.
Yeah, as a cost benefit analysis, I see how that goes. Is there a specific way that you're measuring that qualified business conversation? Like what is that metric that you're using to say, as you had mentioned, like, so there's a social event, one of your 5 salespeople that you sent to this event has a great conversation with a potential client. How are you measuring that it is a qualified business conversation?
Before they go to a trade show, we have like a kind of a pre-event briefing with the team. And
Mhm.
one of the metrics they have to really report is a qualified conversation. So, if they have a qualified conversation with a prospect or an existing client, and it's talking about a new product that we have, or maybe it's an upgrade, or it's maybe a new deal, they can, if they can, obviously, they have to quantify that deal. And basically they'll report to us, saying, I had, one qualified conversation with, such client, and we talk about this product worth, 25,
Mhm.
$30,000, for example. That's how we do it right now.
Mhm.
So, at a large trade show, we could come back with 100 qualified conversation worth, $1 million in terms of, potential opportunities, revenue.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant one. I'm telling you right now, I'm going to steal that idea. So
Okay.
you've developed a method over the years to measure event ROI. Can you walk us through it? And we talked about it, I guess, about QBC and that ratio. But what are the essential components of that approach? And how does it differ from what most people would see as a traditional post-event reporting?
Well, first of all, the key is to have a briefing before people,
Mm.
travel, go to the trade show. I mean, just making sure they understand the KPI, the goals, objective. Like I said, we try to get 10 times, what we spend. So
Mm.
they have to understand, the goal. They have to understand the metrics we are looking, to get back from the trade show. Obviously, the reporting on Salesforce is extremely important because the events team, that's how we don't travel all the time to all the events, right? So we need to really see what's going on. Then right after the event, we will immediately have a debriefing within a week, 2 weeks max, with the team, trying to understand, how did it work? How did it go? Making sure they download the leads from the lead retrieval, for example, making sure they have the correct campaign name to report on Salesforce. Then what we do is we have a template, which is kind of a PowerPoint slide presentation, and we'll start reporting, right? The leads, the dollar opportunities, the qualified business conversation. So you need to get that information from sales. And that's why I think it's really critical to have a good relationship with your sales team because, it's a partnership. I mean, if you don't connect well with them and they don't value your role, it's going to be hard to get, to get the data. So I think, they see us as a strategic resources at DTN. I mean, we provide support. I mean, they understand that we need this data to make decisions for next year. And we'll share the payback ratio. Obviously, for example, in terms of branding, super important to understand how many people were in the room, when maybe your CEO spoke at that conference, what competition were present and at what level. I mean, I want to see if my competition are attending, or they exhibiting, or they presenting on or not. I mean, that's something I definitely want to, investigate. We try to have a list of all the metrics, do the calculation, and provide a very detailed post-event report.
So when you're managing a slate of 75 plus events a year, and I want to put it in the context of that payback metric, which seems sort of like an umbrella over the entire strategy, not everything can be measured in the same way. So how do you decide which events warrant that deeper investment, visibility, or measurement? And is there anything that you've seen in the data that led you to cut a major event or even reprioritize?
The process we use is, you get that payback ratio from an event. Whether it's a small or large event, you have a payback ratio. What we're going to do is we're going to use a graphic, and it's basically the Boston Consulting Group metric. So basically, on one side you're going to have your payback ratio, and on the horizontal line you're going to have your expenses. And basically you have like 4 quadrants, right? I mean, you have the super high payback, extremely expensive event. You have the low expense, low ROI, for example. And that helps us making decision, because what we're going to find out, for example, is you have an extremely expensive event that you go every year, generating a very high payback, right? So in that case, what we will have done, and that happens, for example, if it's a big trade show in Miami in February, a lot of salespeople wants to go to Miami in February. All of our clients are there, and we have a very large exhibit space. But the question is, why do we have a huge exhibit space? If we have all the clients there, we're on the program, we don't need to send 20 people. So what we've done is, let's try to find out a way to reduce expenses. So maybe we'll do a smaller exhibit and spend the money maybe in sponsorship, to have more presence on the stage, for example. That way you don't have to send 20 people to manage a small, decent exhibit space and a speaking opportunity. We had, for example, programs where it was low expense, low payback. So maybe we should invest in that conference. Maybe let's try to have a larger exhibit space to attract more people. Maybe we should be on the program to see, raise the profile of our, case study. And then you have situation where you have, very high expense events with low payback. That's an example of why are we going back to an event that is extremely expensive, doesn't generate any ROI. And normally we give it 2 years, because you always have, salespeople coming back to you and say, no, we will have to wait a little bit. We have ongoing conversation. But for me, within 2 years, if there's no return and, it's an expensive, there's so many events going on right now, Matthew, as you know, I will be looking for another opportunity because there's so much going on. So I think that metrics really help us to visualize, right? And we will put all the trade show on different metrics based on the payback, on the expenses. I think that's really a great way to visualize where you are and making decision. Obviously, with your team, with sales, so they also have to understand we cannot keep going to an event that represent a huge expenses and a huge ROI. I mean, we have to really try to make changes, right, for the best of it.
So you also lead incentive programs and internal events like sales kickoffs. Those aren't always about direct revenue. So how are you measuring their strategic value? Like, is there a metric or that an internal event is truly moving the needle for an employee performance or culture?
So that's a great question. I had a conversation recently with an expert in the industry, and we're talking about how do you measure, success of an incentive program. And there's a couple of things that we discuss. And I think the first thing is when you have a qualifier going to an incentive program, one of the metrics we discussed was, let's look at his performance before and after. So what was his target, or how much sale did he generate before joining P Club and after. That was one metric, just to see the impact on the program. Is he motivated to go back next year? Did he see the value of being an award winner? Another thing we look at was the kind of the retention. I mean, how many qualifiers are still within the organization 1 year after P Club. That was another metric that I find interesting. When you look at those qualifiers, are they bringing new employee to your organization by promoting, the organization? And that's another metric we are considering. If somebody's an award winner and they have generated maybe 5 or 6 referrals of employee who joins the company, there's value, right? There's retention. So it's not easy. And you're not talking about dollar value. It's more about, engagement, NPS, and comparing revenue pre and post. So that's where right now, we're considering to evaluate AOI from incentive programs.
I love personifying that cultural measurement in not only employee retention and obviously sales performance year over year. I think those are metrics that we all sort of look at, but the idea of how much are employees trying to bring in their friends.
Yes.
That's a really interesting metric to look at, because that, not like, especially if you think about a net promoter score.
Yes,
that,
exactly. Yep.
That's a real bet. Like if all my employees walk in and say, "Come and have a job working with Matthew," it's because I'm doing something right. And so that's a great metric. Thank you for that insight.
No, exactly. And I know, for example, like being part of P Club, right? That's something you want to have in your organization. And it's not only for salespeople. We open P Club to, engineering, product, marketing, finance. So it's not only for sales. So, it's all about, I really, people would love to join the program. They heard about it. They know the value of the program. People are talking about it. We do some, internal communication about the program, pre and post. So that's really creates, the excitement.
Absolutely. So let's talk about your sort of stakeholder communications in that. How do you present that kind of event performance to executives in a way that's both strategic and digestible? Any advice for event marketers trying to earn a seat at that table with their CFOs or CROs?
So, as I mentioned, we come up with a 5-slide PowerPoint presentation, right, for all the events. But for the C leaders, the C suites, we will have just a 1-page executive summary, because they're never going to go through 5-page, right, when it comes to a trade show and event. So what we'll do is like the first page, executive summary with key information, which is basically, name of the event, dates, payback ratio. That's all they want to see, payback ratio. On basically opportunities generated and, close one deal. That's going to be tricky because we send that report within a few weeks. So it's a living document. Maybe we'll send an update to them, within 6 months. But that's really the key. It's just, what was the level of participation, key metrics. That's the first page. And then after the remaining slides, it will be more about, how you came up with the calculation, maybe the details of the opportunities, networking interactions, maybe exhibit effectiveness, how many people were at the booth. So all that stuff.
So with increasing scrutiny on marketing spend, how do you see the event measurements evolving in the next 2 to 3 years? Are there any emerging metrics or technologies you're particularly excited about?
Right now, the reporting, it's a manual process, right? You have your CRM system that provide you a couple of information, but to put it together, it's a manual process. There is a few companies that provide AOI assistance. But personally, right now, the cost of acquiring that technology, it has been difficult for me to justify, to basically, purchase a license and, to do the reporting. So I think in the next 2 or 3 years, I'm really hoping there will be, some type of software or system that will automatically, pull that information, because it takes some time, right, to do those post-event measurements. It's, substantial effort that you have to, put into. So I'm really hoping that, the technology will help us to make things much faster, when it comes to, commercial measurements.
Absolutely. So we always like to wrap up these episodes with some practical steps that our listeners can take. So for an event professional listening who wants to evolve beyond sort of vanity metrics and truly prove business value, what's the one mindset shift and the one practical action you think they should take to prioritize starting today?
Yes. So I would recommend to really invest time in, doing those post-event reporting and understanding the metrics that are important to your organization. It's time that is well spent because you want to be seen as a strategic resources for your organization. I think, whether you work for a small company or a very large organization, you can raise the profile of your team by spending the time to do this reporting. It's I think that's really my one takeaway I would recommend for somebody who's starting to get into event measurements.
Excellent. Well, Francois, thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast. And for anybody who's listening, don't forget to hit that subscribe button wherever you're listening. Share this episode with one of your event professional friends or leave a comment below. And of course, if you want to access further resources based on some of the past episodes or access past episodes in our archive, go to productionvaluematters.com and subscribe there. Francois, again, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you, Matthew.
Production Value Matters, the Business Events Podcast, is brought to you by Byrne Production Services. To learn more about Byrne Production Services and how we can achieve your business goals, head over to byrneproductionservices.com. Thanks for listening.